This is Jenny Bell from Clarington, Ohio, and I'm listening to Barbecue Central.
Start the game! Let's go!
We'll do it live. Okay. Well, do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live!
So to get that perfect barbecue, you use wood. Are you sure it's safe? Whatever. We put the lighter fluid on, strike the match, and... Oh! Should we call the fire department? That might be a good idea.
Good evening and welcome to the Really Big Barbecue Central Show. This is the show that talks about all things that are important to the world of barbecue and grilling. The show originated from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame city, Bomb City, USA, Cleveland, Ohio, the barbecue capital of the North Coast. I'm your program host, Greg Rempe. Happy to have you aboard here on your Tuesday evenings, the live fire fun and frivolity show. If you'd like to get in contact with the show this evening, or if you would like to follow the show during off-show hours, here's how you do all of that.
You can get in touch with the show by sending an email to Greg at BBQCentralShow.com. Follow us on all the social media channels at BBQ Central Show. And be sure to subscribe to the show podcast feed on your favorite podcast platform.
Everything else you want to find out about the show can be found at the main website, thebbqcentralshow.com. And here's what's happening in case you can get the newsletter. If you are a fan of the show, a longtime fan of the show, you know what's happening here in the first hour. No surprise, it's the second Tuesday of a month. And within the confines of the first hour, you will find in about 12 minutes from now, the creator of AmazingRibs.com, Meathead. Especially important for the noobs that are joining us into the barbecue live fire circuit. We're going to be teaching you all about brining and osmosis and injections and things that they do and don't do, a little debunking of old wives' tales, all that fun stuff. So especially if you are newer to the game, sooner or later somebody's going to say, well, do you brine your chicken or your poultry? And you're going to go, I don't even know what that means. We'll help you get there right off the bat. 35 past the first hour, our pal and contributing barbecue editor to Southern Living Magazine and runner of RobertFMoss.com, Robert Moss. We continue what has been 8 months or going on 8 months of incredibly insightful, thoughtful, and very important barbecue information. And tonight, we are going to be talking specifically about tracing influences and adaptions of Southern barbecue outside of the region. Not inside, outside. So always looking forward to seeing what Robert Moss brings to the table here from a discussion and teachability standpoint. That'll close the first hour. We'll move to the second hour. Joining me for the first time, the creator of a YouTube channel and website called The Barbecue Lab, David Gafford, joins us. Really looking forward to getting the backstory of the Barbecue Lab from Dave. Met him in person at the ThermalWorks event in Utah a month or two ago. And if things pan out and I don't offend him, and both of those things could happen, I suppose, I see recurring guest Dave from the Barbecue Lab early and often. He's getting his hands on a whole bunch of cool stuff. He does really good reviews, unbiased reviews. I've watched a number of the videos there on YouTube, so excited to have David on here for the first time. 14 past the second hour, and then coming out of the bullpen. When I have the opportunity to promote Cleveland, I'm always promoting Cleveland. Back for his second appearance on the show, Darren Carter from Carter's Barbecue. We're going to talk about a little web episode miniseries type thing that GoDaddy put on. Made in America, I believe is what it's called, or Working in America, something along these lines. And he's going to tell us all about the experience and how he got the opportunity and perhaps what he would do different if he had it all over to do again. So there you go, Meathead and Robert Moss first hour, David Gafford from the Barbecue Lab, and Darren Carter from Carter's Barbecue in the second hour. Don't forget you can follow me socially, Instagram, the Twitter, TikTok, Snapper Snaps, and the LinkedIns, all with the handle at BBQ Central Show. And of course, we say good evening to those of you watching tonight through one of our video streaming platforms. You can go to facebook.com/BBQ Central Show or twitter.com/BBQ Central Show. Or you can watch on YouTube, which is youtube.com/@BBQ Central Show. And we have a new YouTube poll question of the week that we're asking everybody that's watching through YouTube. And of course, we'll ask all guests here this evening. The burning question is, have you purchased a bottle of Doug Scheiding's rubs yet? And currently 69% of you are saying no. In the early voting, it was 50-50 all the way through 6 or 7 votes. So this show proving to be a revenue top-line generator for our pal Doug Scheiding over at Rogue Cookers. I encourage you to give them a try. They're really good. Results of the poll question from now 2 weeks ago. Do you remove the membrane on spare ribs? 92% of you finished by saying yes, you do. But I'm going to be now the 8% that said no. According to Aaron Franklin, I'm wasting my time. We'll leave the membrane on. Maybe I'll ask Meathead and Robert Moss about that as well. So we'll start here tonight, and a lot of things have happened over the past week and a half. And while I could easily talk about the computer crash of 2024, I can leave that for a later show or another show altogether and talk about what happened halfway through the interview when Doug was on a couple weeks ago. Tonight, though, I will start on a different topic. And this is not a barbecue and grilling related take. It's about one of the best people I have ever had the privilege of getting to know during my 50 years of life. Her name is Jenny Bell. In fact, you heard her during the open of the show with the ID, Jenny Bell from Clarington, Ohio. If you missed it, it's this.
Hello, this is Jenny Bell from Clarington, Ohio, and I'm listening to Barbecue Central.
Jenny passed away a week ago this past Saturday. Not a surprise to those of us that knew her and knew the condition that she was in, declining rapidly over the past few weeks, suffering from Alzheimer's and, honestly, just old age to a degree. She lived 96 great years. I would say at least 90 of them, maybe a few more, done on her terms and her terms alone, with her wits and her faculties and her charm with her. Few can say that when they get to that age. Usually it degrades well before that, and there's no quality of life, but not her. Becky and I, my wife, went to see her the Friday before she passed away, like the day before. So she passed away the next day around 6 p.m. that Saturday. Certainly, I'm very happy that I got to see her one last time when my wife was like, we're going to go and see, because it sounds like it's getting close. I was ready to go. Like, can we leave fast enough? No. So we got down there and got to see her in a different state than we would normally see her, of course. But it was great to see her one last time. But if I'm being honest, it would never be enough. When that quality of a person is in your life, seeing them a few times a year isn't enough. Seeing them once a month isn't enough. Hell, for the people that see her every day, it probably wasn't enough. That's the impact that Jenny made on the people that she knew, both friends, family, everybody included, especially the family. I would say the impact immeasurable. When I think about a singular word to describe Jenny, the word selfless immediately comes to me. A loyal wife, a dedicated mother, I could go on and on about how great of a grandmother and great-grandmother she was, always ready to watch any and all of the grandkids, help anybody, support anybody that needed support, always willing to cook, clean, do whatever it took or whatever was needed for those around her. And her ability to entertain was second to none. I remember distinctly visiting while I was in college with Becky. It was like going to food heaven. And for those that went to college, food wasn't always that great. So getting a superior quality of food from the second you walked in the door, food was ready to eat. There was also food being made. There was also food being game planned for later in that visit, whether it was 24 hours or 48 hours or a week. No one ever left that house hungry, ever. You couldn't possibly. And it wasn't that you felt bad for saying no. It's that the food was so good, you couldn't say no. There was no arm twisting or guilting or anything like that. It's just that everything was great. So you had no problem eating like a fatso. She's a person who does the thing that few do. First, she was a living legend. I don't know how many people I could sit here and say, that person, a living legend, somebody that is bigger than life, that people talk about while they're here on earth, a living legend. And now, due to the people who are left behind and who continue to live, they will continue to tell the stories of how great Jenny Bell was, how great her food was, how great of a person she was. And when you pass away, and there are legions of fans left on this earth, you transition into something that very few people get to transition into, which is attaining the status of immortality. There is no doubt in my mind that years from now, there will be somebody who didn't even know Jenny Bell in person, never met her, didn't have an interaction with her, or could share an anecdote. But there are so many fans around Southern Ohio who knew her and experienced her that they're telling everybody about Jenny Bell. There's no doubt in my mind that at some point in years to come, somebody who had no firsthand experience with her is going to tell a Jenny Bell story because it impacted them that much. Just the story being told to them. That's immortal status right there. That doesn't happen a lot. To go from living legend to immortal status. It's special. There were very few like her. And she wasn't even my flesh and blood grandmother. But she is somebody that impacted me greatly, taught me how to be a good human, taught me how to be thankful, taught me how to be compassionate, not be vengeful. All the greatest qualities in a human being that you would like to see, she embodied. So her attaining this immortal status that I'm talking about, a cinch, she's a shoo-in for that. And it's no surprise to me. So, Jenny, one last time from us here at the Barbecue Central Show. We love you. And we're going to miss you. So that's why there was no show last week. But we have a meathead in the green room. We have brining on the agenda. And we have a YouTube poll question of the week to get to as well. But before we do that, we're welcoming back who? Our pals over at Schwank Grills. That's right. We welcome back Schwank. Gang, check out the grill that everybody is talking about, still talking about, since the last time they sponsored. You continue to see it all over websites, social media, the Schwenk grill. What do you need to know? The unit heats up to 1,500 degrees using infrared burner technology. More on that here in a second. What does that mean to you? Now you can grill the juiciest steaks you've ever tasted in as little as 40 minutes? No. 10 minutes? Don't even think about it. How about 3 to 4 minutes, depending on thickness? No more wasting your life cooking the proteins you want. Schwenk Grill does it quickly and with great results. Now, let's address that infrared burner technology. It happens to be the same technology that's used in steakhouses like Morton's, Del Frisco's, Cut 432, and the list goes on. And this isn't just the same type, it's the same Schwenk burner system. Same thing, except now it's on your backyard. Instead of having to go to the expensive steakhouses, you can do it right there. Remember, at 1,500 degrees, you can build a delicious crust on both sides of the steak without overcooking. Also, the steak incredibly juicy and flavorful. Truly, there's no other grill like it on the market right now. Some are calling it the future of grilling. It's not just a steak cooking machine. You can also do delicate fish fillets like salmon. You can do chicken. You can do vegetables. You can do it all, even pizza, like it's showing right there on the video. Here's the deal that you want. You can save $150 off when you go to schwenkgrills.com and you use promo code BBQ Central. That's promo code BBQ Central at checkout, and it saves you $150 off a Schwenk grill. It's that easy to save money and enjoy restaurant quality heat. You can also get a link in the show notes, on the show newsletter, or you can go to the homepage and click on the Schwenk Grills logo. Many different ways to get there. Just make sure you're using promo code BBQ Central at checkout so you can save your $150. Meathead is next. Stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the BBQ Central Show. Broadcasting live from the BBQ Central Show studios in Cleveland, Ohio. You're listening to the BBQ Central Show. Once again, here's your host, Greg Rempe.
Welcome back. This portion of the show being brought to you by cookinpellets.com, your number one source for quality wood pellets for all your pellet-driven cookers. You visit cookinpellets.com for more information or to peruse what they're offering. And then when you're ready to buy, do the complete opposite of what you should do everywhere else. Leave the website and instead go to Amazon.com or Lowe's.com or Walmart.com. Same great products, just much better shipping rates as told to be by CB over at Cookin' Pellets. My first guest tonight has created one of the most heavily trafficked barbecue and grilling websites on the face of the earth. A best-selling author, a barbecue Hall of Famer, a Barbecue Central Show's guest Hall of Famer. We welcome back our pal, none other than Meathead from AmazingRibs.com. Meathead, we have a YouTube poll question of the week that we're asking everybody tonight, which is this: have you purchased a bottle or all of the 3 bottles of Doug Scheiding's rubs yet, yes or no?
I have tried Doug's products. But I must confess I didn't purchase them. Doug was kind enough to send me some samples. He and I are old friends. But I think the more important quiz question is how many people have tried Meathead's rubs and sauces.
All right, so the follow-up YouTube poll question of the week that I'll track here in the instant chat is how many people have bought Meathead's rubs and sauces, so we'll track that. Meathead, do you take the membrane off of spare ribs?
Yes, I take them off of all ribs except beef ribs. You need to leave them on beef ribs, otherwise they'll fall apart.
Yep.
I take them off not because they block smoke, not because they block flavor, but they can get very chewy or rubbery or leathery, depending on how you cook them. And I think it's a courtesy to my guests to make the food as easy to eat as possible. I went to Japan a few years ago, and they have a whole regimen of cooking called kaiseki. It's pretty much the same food you would serve on a Tuesday night. only you prepare it very carefully, very meticulously, very beautifully, because it's out of respect to your guests. And I feel that removing the membrane is kaiseki.
Why specifically a Tuesday night, or is it because it's Tuesday night?
I'm
You've
just saying,
decided
any night, Tuesday, Wednesday, any night. I mean, you can have a very special guest over and serve them a meal that you would cook on any night, but you do it meticulously.
We have a topic this evening, as I was talking about in the newsletter. We're constantly gaining new audience members who have a very minuscule knowledge base to work off of, if you can believe it. They're just getting into it. Maybe they had a birthday over the summer and the wife decided to get the person a smoker, or the husband decided to get the person a smoker, whatever the case may be. So there's a lot of terms and a lot of acronyms and a lot of information that they're going to be ingesting here over the next weeks and months as they become their own backyard pitmaster. One of those hot button topics inevitably will be, if you do how do you do your chicken? Do you brine it? Do you brine your turkey for Thanksgiving? Brining is a big deal. So you thought it would be a good idea to refresh everybody. I also bought into that, by the way, because there are a bunch of new people always coming in. So let's talk about the topic of brining, and let's go right from a 30,000 foot level to start, and then we can kind of nail down from there. What is brining?
Well, brining is a way to add salt to food. And let's back up to even the 40,000 foot level and talk a little bit about salt. Salt is the magic rock. Salt behaves differently than any other herb and spice you have on your spice rack. Salt is just two little atoms, sodium and chloride. And when they get wet, they get electrified. It's called ionized. And they can move deep into the center of a steak or a chicken or whatever protein, even vegetables. But garlic and sugar's 23 or more atoms. They're too large to penetrate beyond the little cracks and pores in the surface. They can't get deep. And the proof is, if you don't believe me, is go get a turkey breast or a pork loin and sprinkle every darn rub and salt and combination of flavors you want on it. And if you cut it open and take a core sample, you won't taste any of it. You won't taste the garlic. You won't taste the sugar. You won't taste the black pepper. So when you take your turkey and you put it in that beer cooler and fill it with apple juice and dump a ton of black pepper and sugar and salt in there, the only thing that's getting into the turkey is the salt. All the rest of the stuff will season the surface, which is fine. But you can waste a lot less ingredients just by sprinkling your salt, your black pepper rather, and sugar and garlic and all that stuff on the surface. Now, when you dunk food into a vat of liquid, water or apple juice or something, it's called wet brining. And I'm pretty sure I'm the one that coined the two terms dry brining and wet brining about 15, 20 years ago. I don't believe anybody had used those terms previously, but they're differentiated. And I got some blowback over the term dry brining, because typically brining is done in a saline or salt solution.
Yeah.
And most recipes for wet brining or dunking it in water have you make up a solution that's around 6%. But the ideal salt content of protein, like a chicken or a turkey, is less than 1%. 1/2 of 1% is generally the ideal amount.
Wow.
So if you're dunking it into a 6% solution, you've got to kind of guesstimate the time that you leave it in there. Otherwise, it can get too salty. And that's always a tricky line to walk. I prefer dry brining. Dry brining is just sprinkling salt on the meat. If you apply a 1/2 teaspoon of Morton's coarse kosher salt per pound of meat, that's all you need. And it comes through at about 1/2 to 3/4%, exactly the right amount. So you can't over salt it. And you don't need to have a big old vat of liquid in your fridge. So I think dry brining is a better way to go. Now, people complain that they say the salt pulls liquid out of the meat. And when they season a lot of food, like a brisket or something, and they pour the rub on, they think the salt is pulling the liquid out because there's liquid in the pan. But it's not the salt. The salt does, in fact, pull a little liquid to the surface, but it's just enough to melt the salt and dissolve it, and then it sucks the salt back in. All that liquid in the bottom is being pulled to the surface by the sugar and the other ingredients in the solution. And there's another myth I want to bust right here. The way the salt gets into the meat is a process called diffusion, not osmosis. Everybody learned a little bit about osmosis in school, but osmosis is about the movement of water. Diffusion is the movement of salt. And Greg's just thrown up on the screen a graphic that's from my new book, which will be out in spring. And you can see in diffusion, the salt moves from a high concentration to a low concentration. In osmosis, the water moves from a low concentration to a high concentration. So when you sprinkle salt on meat, it's really diffusion, not osmosis. And that's a myth that just doesn't want to go away. The other thing I wanted to mention, Greg, is brinerades. And again, I think this is a term I coined. It's a marinade that has got high salt concentration. So if you're marinating, the salt will penetrate. So like, for example, if you marinate with soy sauce, which is salty, it will penetrate. The marinade will, the salt will penetrate. The rest of the flavors will remain on or near the surface. But that's a great way to do your marinades, is to make sure there's salt in them so you have a brinerade.
I've never heard of the term brinerade. So maybe
it's a
marinade
marinade with salt. I think I coined the term, Greg.
Do you trademark that?
I don't trademark. Greg, I didn't invent reverse sear, but I'm pretty sure I introduced the barbecue world to the concept, or certainly popularized it. There's so many things that I have taught and that are in my book and on the website. It's just my way. I share. I'm an educator.
There was another slide that you had sent me about different sizes and shapes of salt or whatever. Did you want to see that?
Yeah, if you want to throw that up, please. Sure. This is important. A recipe that says add a half a teaspoon of salt. The author is guilty of malpractice. It's a crappy recipe. And unfortunately, most recipes are written that way. They're assuming that you're using table salt, but not everybody uses table salt. In fact, kosher salts become very popular. There's a difference between table salt and kosher salt, and that's the size of the grains. And this little illustration, if you look at, say, the tennis balls and the basketballs, there's a lot more air in the basketball container than in the tennis ball container. So the size and the shape of the salt grains vastly impacts the salinity. So if you use a half a teaspoon of kosher salt, Morton's kosher salt, and by the way, I standardize on Morton's kosher salt in all my recipes. I am not paid for it. I don't know anybody at Morton's. I've never been offered any money for it. I just felt that was a good, easy salt to find. It's easy to pick up with your fingers and sprinkle, and it's just standard in all my recipes. And I always call it out by name. I never just say plain salt. But Morton's kosher salt is a different size and shape than Diamond Crystal kosher salt. So if the recipe just says kosher salt, the question is, which one? And if you want to get the salt right, you start with a recipe that tells you which salt. The other thing is salt is really very much a personal preference. I've had people come back to me and say, hey, this recipe's got too much salt. And the next guy comes along and says, this guy hadn't got enough. So that's a very personal thing. But I try to recommend the amount that I think is appropriate.
How can Morton's, this isn't going to turn into a salt dissertation here, but I feel like I have to ask the question. I have noticed that Morton's is consistently the same, box after box after box. And if I, on the off chance, have to buy a Diamond Crystal for whatever reason, or whatever the hell it's called, that seems to break or become powdery. at a much more rapid rate. And then at that point, I can only assume it becomes, unless you're weighing it, which of course I would always encourage people to do, weigh, and that way you know you have exact amounts. But if you're not going to weigh it, like all of a sudden, you know, a pinch of Morton's and a pinch of Diamond Crystal becomes very skewed. And they're different feeling right out of the box anyway, but then factor in the breakability or dustability of the Diamond Crystal, I find it to be an inferior product. No offense to Diamond Crystal.
Well, you hit on a really important concept, and that is weighing salt. Now, back when I started writing, nobody had thermometers, and I was out there. You can ask the friends at ThermalWorks. They once told me that AmazingRibs.com sold more thermometers than any of their in-house salesmen. We have always promoted thermometers, and we're promoting scales. A kitchen scale is really handy, especially for baking and flour and salt, because all salts have the exact same salinity if you weigh them. So an ounce of Morton's Kosher and an ounce of Malden, which is very large grains, have exactly the same salinity. The weight is equal salinity. The volume by spoons or measurements are not. And you addressed the subject of the powdery stuff. It is a rock, and it's it's brittle, it's fragile. Have you ever noticed when you get a bag of popcorn, the whole popcorns float to the top and all the crumbs go to the bottom?
Yeah. Same
Same thing with salt. The bottom of the salt container often has smaller powdery granules. So it's in inexact science. And by the way, if you go easy with the salt, my recipe's a half a teaspoon per pound of meat. And here's why. Let's talk about a slab of ribs. If you put a rub on it that has salt in it, it may be just enough to make the slab of ribs good. But if you put the same rub on a pork butt, which is 4 to 5 inches thick and weighs a lot more, the salt is not going to penetrate. So I recommend always you add salt and the other seasoning separately. It's like the brake and the gas in your car. They both control your speed, but they work differently and separately. So add the salt, half a teaspoon per pound of Morton's Kosher salt. And so it's by pound, whereas the garlic and all the other stuff is based on surface area, how much surface area you have. So you apply them separately, and all my recipes apply separately. All my rub recipes have no salt in them because I want you to add the salt separately.
You had mentioned a handful of minutes ago about the 1% or one half of 1%. When I look at the enhanced turkeys, let's say during Thanksgiving, it says they're in a 5 or 6 or 7% solution. To me, then that would signify they're immediately oversalted.
No, it's usually, I think, close to 8%, which is the limit. It's up to 8% liquid. The salt portion of that is much smaller. It's not 5 or 8% salt. So it's liquid, and that's liquid could have phosphates in it, which are used often by competition cooks to help retain moisture. Salt does some of that too, by the way. Salt amplifies flavor without altering it. Garlic will alter flavor. Sugar alters flavor. Black pepper alters. Salt doesn't alter it. It just amplifies it. And the other cool thing that this magic rock does is it denatures proteins, which is a fancy way of saying it alters the structure of the protein. That coiled, twisted mass, which is the most complicated molecule on Earth, it will change the shape of it, and it helps it hold on to moisture. So if you if you go easy, use my number, half a teaspoon per pound. You're not, I know your doctor told you to cut back on salt. You're not anywhere near, and I've got on the website some of the calculations as to how much salt you're actually ingesting, and you're way below the daily limit.
If you want more information, please race over to AmazingRibs.com where you can have a whole bunch of free information. And if you really want to throw caution and $35 for a year to the wind, you join the Pitmasters Club over at AmazingRibs.com. You get a bunch of access to great videos and some camaraderie with other like-minded folks. And you put a few bucks in the kitty for Meathead to invest in that great website. Meathead, always appreciate the time. And if you can believe it, we will talk to you again in September.
Oh, my God. Where does the time fly?
Football
Greg, always
season.
fun talking to you.
Football season is upon us, Meathead.
Yes.
We should probably
have
put
a quarterback this year.
Oh, I know you do. How much the confidence changes when you have a first round stud draft pick in the quarterback's position.
Well, he could be Joe Burrow or he could be somebody else.
Yeah.
We don't know. Fingers are crossed over here. A lot of optimism in Chicago.
All right. Well, we're going to continue to be optimistic here in Cleveland. And like everything, we'll see how the season goes. But we'll keep track of it as we continue on. We'll see you in September, Meathead. It's the great Meathead from AmazingRibs.com. And we'll restart that. Robert Moss is ready to go. We'll get to him here in just 1 second. Before we do, I ask you, are you tired of settling for mediocre grilling experiences? Of course you are. Well, it's time to step your game up. Bring the ultimate flavor and cooker to the backyard barbecues. Pits and Spits Charcoal Grills offering the highest quality live fire cooking experience you can get in the market today. Using either wood or charcoal, their solid fuel grills produce those classic flavors you're looking for when you have the time to fire up the grill and cook for family and friends. With a large adjustable fuel tray, you can raise and lower the fire to control and fine-tune the heat. Their take on the very popular Santa Maria-style grill. Check them out online, pitsandspits.com/BBQ Central. That's pitsandspits.com/BBQ Central, all spelled out. Use promo code Charcoal Central, all one word as well, Charcoal Central, for $150 off any charcoal grill. Pitsandspits.com, and that's the double T on the pits and the spits.com/BBQ Central, and promo code Charcoal Central for $150 off at checkout. We're back with Robert Moss right after this. Stick around. Be right back.
You're listening to the BBQ Central Show. Howard Stern, Jim Rome, Dan Patrick, and Greg Rempe. The Mountain Rushmore of talk show entertainment. Now, let's get back to the BBQ Central Show.
And we thank Meathead for joining us last segment. This portion of the show being brought to you by the Fireboard 2, Fireboard 2 Drive, Fireboard Spark, and the all-new Fireboard Pulse. If you have Alexa or the Google Assistant in your home, you're in luck. The Fireboard 2 and Drive fully integrated with all of these smart speakers. You find out more by visiting fireboard.com, or you call them with your questions, 816-945-2232. My next guest tonight is the contributing barbecue editor for Southern Living Magazine, a 2023 Barbecue Central Show's guest Hall of Famer, our monthly pal, Robert Moss. Robert, appreciate you joining me here this evening, as you have each and every month for now a handful of years. We have a YouTube poll question of the week that we're asking everybody, and eventually it will go into two questions here. But one right off the bat, have you purchased a bottle of Doug Scheiding's rubs yet?
No, I have not.
84% of the people, by the way, have not purchased Doug's rubs.
But I have to explain. I would ordinarily do it. I am on a rub moratorium that was mandated after the pandemic, when apparently everybody and their uncle started selling rubs in 2020 or 2021, and I kept getting boxes shipped to my doorstep, and I had it once the entire shelf of my pantry was filled with bottles of barbecue rub. My wife is like, no more rub. They cannot go in there. So once we get through all that rub, which could be several decades from now, I'll look into Doug's.
Take it from me, they're good. I didn't pay for them, but they're definitely good. Actually, I did buy a bottle of his rub because the one that the girls seemed to like the most, I unknowingly used it up. Thought I had more of it, but it was the other bottle that I had more of. So I had to become then a paying member.
I'm from South Carolina. Our definition of rub is salt. And in my case, Morton's kosher salt, and I've always got a box of that, and maybe some black pepper, and that's about as crazy as we get down here. So we don't go through a lot of rub in our household.
Have you ever used that diamond crystal?
I have. I'm actually I'm on board with everything B had said. Weigh it. I've gotten so used to using Morton salt, I don't measure anything. I just grab a pinch. I sort of know how much it is. And they were out of Morton's one time. I went to the grocery store, so I got Diamond Crystals. It's completely different. It's much finer grain. The same sort of, like, if you're just doing it by feel, you salt with it, it's totally different. It's actually much more salty because I think there's just a finer grain, a lot more salinity for the same pinch size. And so, I've used them both. And if you're not familiar with the salt, definitely weigh it because each salt behaves very differently.
I had Aaron Franklin on the show a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about, we had an unplanned rib class, I guess. And I was telling him how I had just gotten done a week or two before that doing what ended up being an 8-rack spare rib cook for what was a surprise birthday party for me. And I was looking at it during the prep phase, and I was going, am I really going to pull 8 membranes off the back of these spare ribs? Now, baby back ribs, very easy to do. I have a whole process down where you worm your finger through the middle of the rack and then you can just pull up and they all come out very nice and easy. Not so easy with the spare ribs. So long way to go to say, are you a membrane jerker when it comes to spare ribs?
Usually, though, I'm not passionate about it one way or another. I'm with you. I usually do spares and grab a paper towel and start to, and sometimes it comes right off, and sometimes I'm jerking at it and I'm thinking, why am I doing this? I don't mind it if the ribs have a little membrane on the bottom once they're cooked. It's just something you pull off. But typically, yes, I will try to pull them off unless I'm just feeling impatient or it's a particularly hard rack to get the membrane off of.
Tonight's topic, and we've had now going on 8 months of great educational topics that I'm getting a lot of feedback on, so we'll keep the train going here. I want to talk about tracing the influences and adaptations of Southern barbecue, but this time outside of the region. So maybe we can explore how Southern barbecue traditions have migrated and interacted with other culinary cultures, both here within the States and how they might also infect the rest of the world.
Yeah. And that got me thinking as I was sort of prepping about, because we have talked in the past about how the barbecue sort of, developed in the South and spread westward all the way to California as early as the gold rush days in the 19th century. But it's sort of interesting. There's this sort of cycle that parts of the country discover Southern barbecue at different times over the years, or it moves outward for various reasons. So one of the ones we talked about was the westward migration, which a lot of Southerners headed to Texas, headed to California, and took barbecue with them. But from the earliest days, like the colonial, really right after the Revolution, what you may call the early Republic years, a lot of commentators would visit the early United States from England and Europe and other places. And some of our best descriptions of early barbecues come from their travel writings, because somebody who lives in the United States doesn't really want to spend a lot of time describing a barbecue because everybody goes to them. They know what they're like. It's more something that a visitor will describe. So you see a lot of great descriptions in the 1780s, 1790s, easing into the 19th century of this unique thing called the American barbecue. And American barbecue at the time was very different. People have been roasting animals over fire forever, and every culture has some form of grilled or roasted meat. But the whole animal cooked like over the coals in a hole in the ground, basted with the vinegar, pepper, salt, lard or butter sauce. That was something unique to the United States, the early United States, and was picked up on. I don't know though that people would come visit and commentate, comment on it in their writing, but I don't know if they would take it back, to England or wherever and try to stage an American barbecue. I haven't found a whole lot of instances of that in the studies. But of course, the American barbecue tradition got bigger and bigger and bigger all the way through to the 19th century. And it was very much a Southern tradition, somewhat of a Western tradition in there. But in the 1890s, there was this period where all of a sudden the Southern barbecue was discovered by the national press, if you will, which is headquartered in New York, but also in all the other major cities in the Northeast. But there was a big exposition, the Atlanta Cotton, I think it's called the Atlanta Cotton States and International Exposition, I think, in 1895, held in Atlanta. It was one of these big sort of World Fair kind of things. And it brought lots and lots of visitors to Atlanta. And this was an interesting time in American history because it was when the South and North were sort of reuniting after the 30 years since the Civil War, and there's a lot of interest in the South from Northern readers. So lots and lots of journalists came south on the train from New York and elsewhere, and wrote up this big Cotton State Exposition, which featured a giant barbecue concession from John Wilkes, or actually John Calloway, who was the barbecuing sheriff of Wilkes County, Georgia. And he had these like giant pits and roasting pigs and shoats and all that kind of thing. And so there was a little flurry of newspaper stories. And this was also in the time when the early days of things like the Associated Press and the other wire or newspaper syndicates. So one story might be written and then sent out via telegram to all the newspapers all across the country. So you saw all these newspaper articles just all over the place describing these Georgia barbecues. And for a long time, for several decades, Georgia was sort of considered to be the home of Southern barbecue. Again, I don't know that made a lot of impact on the North and other parts of the country adopting American barbecue, but they certainly knew what barbecue was and they learned about it, and it became sort of a fashionable or thing people were interested in. In terms of eating barbecue, that's people coming from outside to the South and then taking the experience with them. In the early 20th century, that's when you saw a lot of people taking barbecue from the South elsewhere. So you had the first Great Migration right around the time of World War I, which was in the Jim Crow era. Lots of African American Southerners decided we can't stay here any longer. We're going to move elsewhere to the northern cities where there's jobs, where we'll be treated better, and that was the first wave. And there's a second Great Migration that happened after the Second World War. But during the first Great Migration, it's sort of interesting how individual states would you sort of go where you know people. So like South Carolinians would tend to go to New York, whereas people in Mississippi tended to go to Chicago. So you had sort of a regional type of thing. But one of the people who left the South during the first Great Migration was a guy named Henry Perry, who was born just outside of Memphis, Tennessee, and headed to Kansas City in the early 19th century. I think he arrived somewhere around 1907, set up a barbecue stand in an alley, cooking sort of Memphis-style barbecue, and then taught a whole generation, including a guy named Charlie Bryant, who had a brother named Arthur Bryant, who ended up opening a restaurant called Arthur Bryant's, which is still there today. He also taught a guy named Arthur Pinkard, who went and worked for George and Arzelia Gates, who opened Gates Barbecue, which is still there today. And so you can sort of trace that lineage straight back to Memphis. Same thing with Chicago after the Second World War, the Second Great Migration, another great outflux from the South. Lots of barbecue folks headed to different parts. So people with barbecue traditions headed from the South to different parts. People in Mississippi tended to go to Chicago because they had connections there. And so you would go to Chicago. And a little town called Indianola, Mississippi, sent several different families left there, headed to Chicago, and ended up opening very famous barbecue joints. The Lemons family from Indianola ended up settling on the south side of Chicago and opened Lem's Barbecue, which is still there today. Yep. One of these classic aquarium smoker barbecues. The Collins brothers, one of whom was named Argia B., headed up as well, or just after World War II, 1940s, 1950s. Argia Bees was opened up. Leon Finney opened Leon's. So the whole South Side barbecue tradition can really be traced back to the South, and that period is, the outward migration of the South took barbecue to northern cities, where initially it was meant to, it was serving other folks from the area who like barbecue, other Mississippi transplants. But then eventually, over time, everybody in Chicago, in the South Side of Chicago at least, fell in love with those kind of ribs and rib tips, and a whole style was born through that migration.
I'm fascinated that Mississippi winds up getting to Chicago. You mentioned that they have connections up there, but I don't know what that means. Does that mean that at one point somebody that everybody knew landed in Chicago and was either writing or calling, Chicago's badass, everybody's got to come up?
Yep. And this is not unique to the Great Migration. You see it with migration patterns all over America and all over the world. I mean, why would you up and move to Los Angeles or Texas? Well, it's because a cousin who got a job up there and said, I can get you a job at the factory. So, you would get on the train and go up. And so it's very much, this sort of series of connections of family relationships. And that's why if you were in Indianola, Mississippi, you wouldn't think to get on a train and go to New York where you knew no one. You could get on a train and go to Chicago where you knew a cousin and had a friend. They could have a place to stay while you got your feet under you, and it could get you a job somewhere. And a lot of this was about moving from the rural agricultural South to places where there were jobs, lots of post-war factory jobs, and knowing somebody who could get you in the door was a big draw.
In the beginning of all this, you had mentioned that through different times is when different areas would be introduced and take to Southern barbecue. Were there times when, let's say, I'm just throwing out a location, let's say, Mississippi was introduced to it, or let's say Indiana was introduced to it, and then you could read about it or find something, and then all of a sudden it disappears, and then there's a reintroduction, and then it disappears again, or once it shows up somewhere, it sticks?
No, and did you mention Indiana on purpose?
No,
or
just it's one of my favorite states, of course.
I know you love Indiana.
Yeah.
That's actually in my little. I've not written it yet, but someday I'm going to write the unexpurgated history of barbecue in Indiana. But Indiana actually has a very interesting barbecue history. It's not tied to the Great Migration, so it wasn't a migration of African Americans, but it was more of white Southerners moving into Indiana. And Southern Indiana is a very much a very southern state in a lot of ways. But in the early 20th century, there was a flourishing barbecue scene in Evansville, Indiana. In fact, if you go back to the papers in the 1920s and 1930s, Evansville tried to claim itself the barbecue capital of America. Actually, they said the commercial barbecue capital of America, because there was a guy named Floyd Ball, or Baugh, or Bow. I'm not sure how you would say it. If you look online, you can find pictures of Ball's Barbecue in Evansville. And he moved up there and opened up a Kentucky or Southern style barbecue joint in Evansville. And I can't quite trace the lineage, but he sold his operation at some point to a guy named Mac McKinney, who opened Mac's Barbecue in Evansville, Indiana, which, if you read Barbecue, The History of American Institution, my history, I talk a good bit about Mac's, because somebody who worked at Mac's was Dave Thomas of Wendy's fame.
Wow.
Who actually opened up a franchise version of Mac's Barbecue that did not do so well. He franchised and licensed the concept from Mac McKinney going back to Bow's. So there's this whole flourishing of barbecue in that part of Indiana. Just to close the loop on Dave decided barbecue was a losing product and it was too expensive, and so he switched to burgers and founded Wendy's. And I think the rest is history.
Yeah, hard to argue with that.
But it's all tied back. Yeah, I think he did okay for himself. But Balls, and there was this whole little flourishing of barbecue in Indiana in the 40s and 50s. And just maybe Dave Thomas put him out of business, but it disappeared by the 60s and 70s. No one was talking about Indiana barbecue anymore. But there was a little flourishing of of barbecue that did not persist in the southern part of India.
Before we go, we all love lists, and you have a new list coming out here in September. What can you scoop us with tonight?
Yeah, so this year, so for Southern Living, we did the top 50 2 years in a row. Last year and the year before, we sort of took some off for the pandemic, but we took a look at it and said, okay, we're not going to do another top 50 for 2024. It's not been enough time. There's not been enough change. It'd be largely the same list, though. Actually, there's been some interesting movement on that list that we'll talk about in a future date. What we decided to do instead was just do the new barbecue joints, which let me actually focus on not having to go revisit a bunch of places I've been before, but a bunch of new places. So we're doing the top new barbecue joints in the South, coming out in the print edition of Southern Living in September, which means it'll be on the newsstand soon. They come out a little bit before September. I don't know exactly when the digital version will drop. I think there'll be 16 restaurants in the print edition, which has limited space, and then an extra 22, 24 in the digital version that will come online, sort of ranking. And there's a lot of really interesting new stuff going on in the barbecue scene. So I had fun not only doing the trips and visiting all these newer places. And new, we defined it as, we did a best new barbecue joints, I think, back in 2022. So, or into 21. So it's basically the last 2 or 3 years. But in the barbecue world, there's surprisingly not that many new places are opening up constantly that are really, really noteworthy. So rounding up 2 or 3 years worth of new barbecue openings. And for this list, it's not a second location of an established restaurant. It has to be a new concept, a new restaurant. So that's coming out in a couple of weeks. It may be hitting the newsstands probably in a week or two. So keep an eye out for that. I had a lot of fun doing it.
All right. So when we rejoin our company here in September, maybe we can take a hack at a good portion of those and get your take.
Yeah, list will be out. I'll be glad to talk about it.
Right.
and talk about some of the trends and things that we're seeing. The one trend I'll preview is that variety seems to be the theme. There's lots and lots of different styles and different barbecue joints out there. So it makes me really optimistic about the future and where barbecue's heading, because there's always something new and interesting to find out there.
The tease is good, so we will wait for September and dig into it a little bit more, and then a new topic. Of course, robertfmoss.com is the website. Robert, always appreciate the time and the insight, and we'll see you in September.
Thing. All right, sounds good.
Robert Moss right there, of course, and doing an incredible job as always. Bill in the chat room. Robert is a great guest. He brings more than information. He's a teacher, and his style and command of history makes him a favorite around here. Absolutely. Look here. Bobby Rempe is watching the show. So I have that shirt. I know. I bought that shirt. Whoa. I probably didn't mean to push that a second time, but you're welcome. Thank you for watching, or thank you for just jumping in for 1 second and noticing the shirt. All right, we're not over yet, but we will be in about 8 seconds. We'll do this piece of business, and then we'll get to the second hour here. Give you a YouTube update on the poll side. Hey, Maddie's in here too. Hey. Hey-o. What do we love about ceramic cookers? We love that they're fuel efficient. We love that you can achieve low and slow temperatures for traditional barbecue meats. We love that you can get rip-roaring hot for the high-temperature grilling of steaks and other thin cuts. But what's missing in the everyday lineup of ceramic cookers? The real ability to do true two-zone cooking. Two-zone cooking is very important to both professional and backyard cooks. It's the best way to manage a fire and cook with confidence. However, getting a two-zone fire in a round ceramic cooker isn't very realistic. Why? Because it's round. Enter Primo Grill and their game-changing oval design. This shape gives you the ability to execute that two-zone setup that you desire. It also gives you the other ceramic grill benefits as well. When you break it down, there's more than 60 different ways to configure the Primo cooker, so you're only limited by your imagination. They have all the accessories that you want nowadays. They have the revamped lift hinge, top and bottom dampers with numbering, a Primo grill rotisserie accessory, the pizza grill accessory, all the accessories that you want. Really complete the Primo experience. It gives you the Primo experience. Only sold through dealers. Find one near you by visiting the website, primogrill.com. Also, follow them on Facebook and Instagram. Also, follow me socially, and I'm always resharing the sponsors of the show and their reels and posts through Instagram. So if you're not following them, make sure you follow me and then follow them after you see them on my feed. Synergistic, primogrill.com. And we're back to wrap the first hour right after this. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Continuing to produce incredibly mediocre content in an exceptionally professional way. You're listening and watching the Barbecue Central Show. Once again, here's your host, Greg Rempe.
All right, welcome back. This portion of the show is brought to you by me, Matty Rempe, weighing in. I'm watching from your mom and dad's house in Florida. Matty, you're in Florida? When did you go there? This would certainly help answer the question, where have you been since Saturday? Maybe next time, let me know. All right. In any event, I now know where Maddie is. Watching the show from my parents' house. What did I do with that? Oh. Well, I don't have it anymore. I do have it. Watching from my parents' house. You remember them, Bill and Connie right there looking as spry as ever. My dad with his sweet watch and forearm tat that he got in the Navy. And, of course, my mom getting ready to smack him like she used to do in the old days. All the times. Mom beating up dad. Happens frequently. All right, we are pointing to the second hour. You refresh your libations, and we'll be back right after this. You're listening and watching the Barbecue Central show right here on the Barbecue Central Network. Stick around, be right back.